All right, so picture this, right? You are calling the shots at like this massive company. You're about to make this decision, and it could like make or break the whole business.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking like billion-dollar decisions
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
High stakes, right? Intense.
Big time.
And today, we're like dissecting what goes wrong. We're going to look at some epic business fails, those moments where you just like scratch your head and go, how did that happen? How did no one see this coming?
Right.
Our guide for this deep dive, this is juicy, by the way, billion-dollar lessons. It breaks down some of the most like jaw-dropping business fails of the past 25 years, and it's written by Paul B. Carroll and Chunka Mui. So get ready, because we're about to like explore 7 disastrous business strategies, and these are things that companies like Kodak, Motorola, big names, they fell for these traps. We're going to use their examples so you can learn from their billion-dollar mistakes and hopefully avoid making your own, right?
Yeah, and I think what's so fascinating about these stories is that it's not just like one-off bad luck, you know.
Mm-hmm.
There are often these recurring patterns, these missteps that honestly are pretty preventable if you know what to look for.
Right.
And by understanding those patterns, we can like arm ourselves with the knowledge to make smarter choices, whether it's a billion-dollar venture or, you know, even just a small decision in our own lives.
Okay, so chapter 1 jumps right into what the authors call the 7 deadly business strategies. And I love this because these strategies, they might seem tempting, right? They might even seem logical, at least on the surface, but they often lead companies down this like path to disaster. So the first one, and this is such classic, is the siren song of synergy.
Yes.
You know, this almost magical belief that if we just merge these two companies, bam, this incredible surge of value is just going to appear, right?
Right, yeah.
Where the whole is somehow magically greater than the sum of its parts, like 1 + 1 = 3.
Right, the classic.
Yeah. But as we're going to see, the reality is often like way less enchanting.
Yeah, it is. It's really easy to get caught up in that like allure of synergy.
Sure.
I mean, for businesses, it's tempting.
Yeah.
But you have to remember that true synergy, it has to benefit the customer. Otherwise, it's just like a Wall Street fantasy, right?
Yeah, it's like a mirage.
It might look great on paper. You know, you create this powerhouse. But if those synergies don't actually translate into like tangible benefits for the end user, for the people actually buying the product,
Yeah.
the whole thing can just unravel so quickly.
It's all about the customer in the end, or it should be, right?
Absolutely.
And I think a great example of this, and it's one of those head scratchers, is when United Airlines tried to buy a hotel chain.
Oh, yeah.
On the surface, you're like, okay, travel, hotels, airlines, it's a no-brainer, right? Book
Yeah.
your flight, book your hotel, one-stop shop, what could be more convenient?
That is streamlined.
Yeah, but it totally flopped. So, like, what went wrong?
Well, it seems like they just made this assumption that customers wanted this bundled service. But it turns out a lot of people, they like the flexibility of choosing their own accommodations. You know, they might have their own preferences, loyalty programs, or maybe the bundled prices weren't actually any better.
Right.
Whatever the reason, that assumed synergy, you know, this beautiful harmony of airlines and hotels, it just like fell flat. It just wasn't relevant to the people who actually mattered most, the customers.
Yeah, it's a classic example of an idea that sounds amazing in a boardroom, but it totally missed the mark in the real world.
Yeah.
It just goes to show you that being customer-centric, it's not just some like trendy buzzword. It needs to be at the core of every decision. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about another one of these potentially treacherous paths to billion-dollar blenders.
Financial engineering.
Yes.
Okay.
This is a big one.
It's a big one.
And it's not always bad, to be fair.
Right.
It's basically using like financial tools and strategies to achieve specific goals, right?
Okay.
Like you could be managing risk or trying to boost profits,
Right.
but it becomes really problematic when those strategies get like totally detached from the actual business itself, the
Right.
fundamentals.
So it's like you're playing this financial game, but you're not really paying attention to the actual product or service you're selling.
Exactly. And a perfect example of this is Green Tree Financial. They were riding that wave of the subprime mortgage boom,
Oh, boy.
offering, get this, 30-year mortgages, but on trailers. Wait, 30-year mortgages on trailers?
On trailers. Even I can tell you that's not going to end well, and I'm no financial expert.
Yeah, that sounds like a recipe for disaster to me.
Oh, it was. They basically built their entire business model on this foundation that was guaranteed to crumble. The big problem. They were giving out these long-term loans on something that loses value really fast. Trailers.
Right.
Trailers, unlike a house, they only last, what, like 10, 15 years?
Yeah.
So even if those borrowers made all their payments for 30 years, the thing they took a loan out for would be, like, worthless by then.
It's like building a house of cards in a wind tunnel.
Exactly. It completely highlights why you need to ground financial decisions in reality.
Right. Don't just chase the quick profit,
Yeah.
Gotta think long term. And that leads us to, I think, a really important takeaway for anybody making big decisions, whether it's in business or in life. Don't get blinded by the hype.
Yes.
Don't get seduced by what seems like a quick win or a really clever financial trick. Take a step back, look at the big picture,
Absolutely.
and ask yourself those critical questions. Does this actually make sense? And what if everything goes wrong? Have a little healthy skepticism
Right.
and be willing to challenge your own assumptions.
Challenge everything.
Exactly.
That actually reminds me of another strategy that can be like a huge gamble, the roll-up. Have you heard of this one?
I feel like I have, but remind me.
Okay, so it's basically the idea that you can, consolidate an entire industry, right? You buy up all these smaller companies, merge them into this, giant mega corporation.
Yeah, okay.
And then, boom, you dominate the market.
Right. It's like a classic power move.
Right.
It's very Wall Street, Buy low, sell high, crush the competition. But I have a feeling it's not always that simple.
You would be correct. I mean, sure, the idea of achieving those economies of scale
Right.
and getting that market dominance,
Yeah.
it's enticing. I get it. But so many companies try this and just totally crash and burn.
Really? So, what usually goes wrong? What are the pitfalls that can turn a roll-up into a disaster?
Well, for starters, culture clashes. Imagine you've got a dozen different companies, and you're trying to smash them all together.
Right.
But each one has its own way of doing things, its own values, its own culture.
Right. It's like a recipe for conflict, right?
Total recipe for disaster. You get resentment, things start to break down, and suddenly the whole thing is just dysfunctional.
It's like trying to fit square pegs into round holes.
Exactly. And then there's the issue of overpaying for these acquisitions.
Right.
You get caught up in the moment.
Right. The bidding wars, the excitement.
Exactly. And you end up paying way too much for a bunch of companies that aren't even worth it.
You know what it makes me think of? That saying, you can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig.
Oh, I love that.
It's like, just because you merge a bunch of companies, it doesn't automatically create this, well-oiled, profitable machine.
It's so true. Sometimes those pieces just don't fit, no matter how hard you try to force them.
And that, I think, leads us to another really important point, which is the danger of staying the course, even when the world around you is changing.
Oh, 100%.
Right.
And there's no better example of this than Kodak.
Yeah, Kodak.
You're correct.
OG of photography.
Right. I mean, this was a brand that was everywhere.
Everywhere. And they just completely failed to adapt to the digital world.
It's easy to look back now and say, oh, they should have seen it coming. But it's more complicated than that.
Yeah, it's like, why didn't they see it coming? Or if they did, why didn't they act?
Well, I think a big part of it was that they were just so used to being on top.
Right.
They were so dominant in the film market that they didn't take the threat of digital photography seriously.
It's like they were blinded by their own success.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, even when they finally started to wake up to the threat, they were just so slow to react.
Yeah, bureaucracy, internal politics, probably a good dose of denial, too.
All of that. And by the time they tried to pivot, it was too little, too late.
Yeah. It's like they were driving with their eyes glued to the rearview mirror instead of looking at the road ahead.
The perfect analogy.
Uh-huh.
They were so focused on their past glory that they missed the future.
And the things that made them successful, their focus on film, their processes, their brand, all of it, it all became a liability.
Because the world changed.
Right. And they didn't change with it.
Exactly. And it just highlights this crucial lesson for any business, really. Past performance is not a guarantee of future success.
Right. Your track record only gets you so far.
You have to be able to adapt. You have to challenge your own assumptions, embrace new technologies, be willing to completely change your business model, even if it means disrupting your own success.
So it's not just about being good at what you do. It's about being adaptable, being willing to pivot, take risks, even when it feels uncomfortable. Okay, so we've talked about synergy, financial engineering, roll-ups, staying the course. What other billion-dollar blunders do we need to be on the lookout for?
Well, let's talk about adjacent markets, because this one trips up a lot of companies.
Okay, so what is that?
It's this idea that just because you're successful in one area, you can automatically replicate that success in another area, even if they're not that closely related.
Oh, I've seen this happen, yeah.
Right. It's like, we're good at making cars, so let's make, I don't know, refrigerators.
Yeah, or we make great software, so surely we can design a hit video game.
Exactly. And it seems logical on the surface, but there's a flaw.
So what's the flaw? Where does it all fall apart?
They overestimate their skills. Just because you can do one thing well doesn't mean you have the magic touch in a totally different industry.
Right, like different industries have different rules, different customers, different everything.
Exactly. And they underestimate those nuances. It's like assuming that just because you're a great chef, you'd also be an amazing architect.
Right, both require creativity, but the skills are completely different.
Totally. And a classic example of this is that cement company, I think it was back in the 80s, that decided to start making lawnmowers.
Wait, cement and lawnmowers?
Yeah, they figured, hey, both of these things are related to home building, right?
I guess so.
We're good at manufacturing. We've got distribution channels. We can do this. But they were wrong.
What happened?
Well, first of all, they totally overestimated how much their customer bases overlapped.
Right, so someone buying cement in bulk to build a skyscraper isn't necessarily your average homeowner looking for a lawnmower.
Exactly. And they totally underestimated how much brand recognition mattered in the lawnmower market.
Right, people are loyal to their lawnmower brands.
Exactly. So even if they made a decent lawnmower, no one knew their name, and they didn't have the marketing power to compete.
It's a good reminder that just because a market seems related, it doesn't mean you can just waltz in and win.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You need to understand that market, the customers, the competition, all of it, before you jump in head first.
It's like do your homework.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about the perils of synergy, the pitfalls of financial engineering, the risks of roll-ups, the danger of staying the course, and the allure of adjacent markets. It feels like we're getting a masterclass in what not to do if you want to avoid those billion-dollar business blunders.
Right. Don't do any of that. But seriously, we've covered a lot of ground, but there's still more to unpack, especially when it comes to the human element of all of this.
Oh yeah, the human factor. Because we can't forget that behind every business decision, there are people making those calls, and people are, well, messy.
Exactly. And Billion Dollar Lessons really dives into that in the later chapters.
Okay, so we're talking about bias, overconfidence, groupthink, all of those things that can lead to really bad decisions.
All of that. And we'll unpack it all in the next part of our deep dive.
I am ready. Let's do it. Okay, so we're diving back into those billion-dollar business blunders, but this time we're getting into the psychology of it all.
The human element.
Exactly. We've talked about bad strategies, missed opportunities, but sometimes I think the biggest disasters just come down to, like, plain old human error.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where Billion Dollar Lessons gets really interesting. In those later chapters, it shifts gears a bit, It moves away from just analyzing market trends and competition and really dives into how decisions are made, like inside a company.
Right, because it's not always about external factors, right?
Exactly. It's about the internal dynamics, the biases, the groupthink, and especially this one big one. Overconfidence.
Overconfidence, yeah, it's like the ultimate blind spot, isn't it?
It really is.
When you're so sure you're right that you stop questioning, you stop looking for other perspectives, that's when things can go really wrong.
100%. It's
Yeah.
like you're wearing blinders. You can't see the risks, and then when those risks inevitably become reality, you're totally unprepared.
So how do you fight that? How do you combat that overconfidence bias? It's not like you can
Mm.
just decide to be less confident, right?
Mhm. Right. It takes a real effort to create a culture where people are comfortable speaking up, even if what they're saying isn't what everyone wants to hear.
Yeah, it's like you need people to tell you you're wrong sometimes.
Exactly. And not just tell you, but feel like they can tell you.
Right, without being afraid of, like, getting in trouble or something.
Exactly. That's
I like-
psychological safety, right?
Yes. And it reminds me of this concept of the devil's advocate, where you have someone whose job it is to poke holes in every idea.
Yes. Love that.
Even if they don't actually disagree, they have to play the role of the skeptic just to make sure every angle is covered.
Exactly. Force yourself to confront those uncomfortable questions before they come back to bite you later.
Okay, so we've challenged our assumptions, we've encouraged people to disagree, but even then, we're still human, right? We all have those biases.
We do.
So what's the final safety net? How do we make sure we're really not missing anything crucial?
Well, the book talks about the power of a second chance meeting, and I think this is brilliant.
Okay, I've never heard of this.
Okay, so imagine this, right? You've made this big decision, everyone's on board, you're ready to go. But then you hit pause.
Okay.
You give yourself and your team a little bit of time to just, cool off.
Okay.
Let those initial emotions subside.
Yeah.
And then you come back together, look at everything with fresh eyes, and you ask, are we still sure about this?
It's like sleeping on a big decision.
Exactly. Sometimes you just need a little distance to see things clearly.
Because when you're caught up in the moment, it's easy to miss things.
Exactly. That's when those biases can really creep in.
Measure twice, cut once, right?
Yes.
Maybe in the business world, it should be like decide once, reconsider twice, and then take action.
I love that. And I think it all comes down to something that's really important in decision-making, and that's humility.
Humility, yeah, being able to admit you might be wrong.
Exactly. Acknowledging that you don't have all the answers.
Which isn't easy for a lot of people, especially in the business world.
It's not, but it's crucial.
So to wrap things up, I want to bring it back to our listeners because ultimately this is about all of us, right? We all make decisions, big and small, every single day.
That's right.
So as you're navigating those choices, those crossroads, what are you taking away from all of this? What have you learned from these billion-dollar blunders?
The big takeaway for me is that we have to be aware of our own biases, challenge our assumptions, and most importantly, be open to changing our minds.
And if you're looking for more insights on this, Billion-Dollar Lessons is definitely worth a read. It's full of those aha moments, those stories that make you realize that even the smartest people can make really dumb mistakes.
And learn from them, hopefully.
Exactly.
All right. Until next time, everybody, stay curious.